let's see how we get on. There we go. Beautiful. All right. Well, we might make a start, everyone. Thank you for your patience. I appreciate it. We're very fortunate tonight to have, I'm going to call it, Richard, I'm going to say the best bird and wildlife watcher at the village. Richard, Richard and his wife Joan have recently moved to the village, but even before they moved in, it was a daily occurrence to see Richard walking around, looking at the wildlife and soaking up the scenes. Richard, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. We arrived in Narara 7 years ago. Came down from Brisbane. Thought it was a great idea. Tried to rent a place, found it very expensive. So we actually thought, well, we better buy one, which turned out to be a very good idea, because we all thought the village would take 2 years to build, and it was about 7 before we could start. So we've lived outside the gate for 7 years. And my background, I'm actually an archaeologist, but I've always been interested in birds. Actually, the two linked up because I, in New Zealand, worked on extinct birds and what happened to them. But always interested in birds, and Narara Ecovillage is a fabulous place. So I look forward to telling you a bit about it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Richard. And it's worth pointing out too that if tonight's session tickles your fancy, Richard does have a more extended option for you to come and actually have a look at some wildlife. Do you want to talk a bit about that now? And we'll also mention it at the end.
Thank you. Yes, on Saturday in 2 weeks' time, Saturday the 19th of September, I'm doing a guided bird walk from 7:30 in the morning to 10:30 or 11. We'll see what we hear, see what we see. And the idea is to learn to identify the most common birds. It'll be mainly birds that we see and hear, though the frogs will probably be busy. And you can book, now I don't know if it's on the website yet, or maybe we can put a link. Yeah, okay, there should be, we'll make sure there's a link on the Narara Ecovillage website if you want to book that. So that's a 3-hour walk. We'll walk around different parts of the village, identify the birds, answer questions. People have all kinds of questions. Talk about how people relate to birds. Some people hate them, some birds. Share your experience of birds. Fantastic. Should be fun because September 19 is almost exactly when typically the dollar birds arrive from Southeast Asia. And if it's the night they arrive, they have quite a few squabbles at night. There's cackling, and I guess they're sorting out where they roost. And then the next day they're busy flying around. So it's exactly when the spring birds arrive. So it'll be interesting to see which of them have got here.
Fantastic. And Richard, when you talk about the spring birds, do they go off our calendar of the seasons, or do they go off kind of seasonal air changes and temperature changes?
It's built into their genetics by now. So it varies from year to year. I think it's temperature, humidity. I'm sure that all helps. If there's a good wind in the right direction, they set off roughly the same time. Well, in fact, typically they set off exactly the same time. They've got very precise clocks, but then they can get affected by storms, and and it does vary a bit within about 1 or 2 weeks. Although the coals and cuckoos are usually within 1 or 2 days of each year. So they're pretty precise.
Wow. There's no island time for them then, by the sound of it.
No, they're on the move. They're programmed to get here. And the spring birds, most of them actually come here to breed, and then by January they're gone. Actually, no, the coals are not gone. But so the residents carry on, and the resident birds right now are breeding, you could say, in order to get the food before the migrants arrive. But obviously it's evolved that way. The residents breed first. Probably for that reason.
Wow. Richard, I understand that you've got a bit of a slideshow of some of the birds that we can see around here. Would you like to go through that now with us?
Yep. Just before I do, I got a couple of statistics that since I've been here in the Narara Ecovillage area, that's from Strickland Forest to Dean Street, I've recorded 147 species of birds. So if you come here, you're not going to see 147 species of birds at any one time, but they are here and they visit at different times. There are 15 species of mammals that are fairly common. And then there's all the microbats, which you never see unless you've got a bat detector that analyzes their sound and tells you what they are. You probably don't know they're there. And rats and things, but the 15 species of mammals that are fairly obvious, 10 species of reptiles that are fairly obvious, frogs, there are 3 common species and 7 others. So there's a lot of birds around here, a lot of life around here. So yes, I'll start with a couple of pictures. So we're just going to share screen. There we go. There we go. No, have you got the shared screen?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, let's see how I go. How do I get to the next slide? There we go. So, the most colourful. There's nothing like, whoop, hold on, I didn't want to do that. So, the most colourful, the prize has got to go to, on the left, crimson rosellas, and on the right, the king parrot. It was a photograph taken by Linda Scott of the king parrot eating some of her tomatoes that she had planted. And clearly the king parrot got there before the tomatoes were ripe, but it doesn't seem to bother the king parrot. So we have them regularly. Crimson rosellas usually 1 or 2 pairs. King parrots, sometimes groups of 7 or 8. They particularly like the wild tobacco trees, which are classified as weeds, but we actually keep some of them because they like them so much. Okay, next one, there we go. The eastern rosella is also an incredibly colourful bird. I think we underestimate it because it's quite common, but when you see them, they really are gorgeous. And I think if you're in other parts of the world, you'd be pretty thrilled to have a bird with those colours. So eastern rosella, there's currently, well, we live down the lower part of the village, overlooking the floodplain. There are 2 pairs which periodically argue over territory. So we have there's a magnificent colour of 4 of these birds, all flashing their blue, yellow, and red colours. Wonderful. And we put up some nest boxes, and some of them are used by eastern rosellas. And this one, I don't know how many people know that. That's the regent bowerbird. Regent's a term often used for anything that has black and gold. So there's regent honeyeater, regent bowerbird. When I showed this picture to the founder of the Ecovillage, Lyndall Parrish, she said, "That's not real, is it?" You know, but it is. That's the male, mature male, and they are absolutely fantastic. And you do see them. They're a bit wary, which is probably how they survive, because with that colour scheme, you're fairly obvious. So you often just see a flash, and then if you have a careful look, you say, "Wow, that was black and gold." But if you're lucky, they come to the bird bath, and this is one in the bird bath in our house in Research Road. So they're pretty spectacular. So there's the most colourful, the most dramatic. I have to say, I really love the birds of prey because it's pretty amazing having eagles and things around here. This is actually not an eagle, although people often think it is. They say, or a friend of mine, Julian, says, "Oh, one of those eagle-y things." It's a big hawk. It's technically a square-tailed kite. And actually, they're seeing quite a lot of them at the moment because they come quite low. They hunt on the treetops, looking for birds' nests and birds in the treetops. So you'll see them quite low. So that's the square-tailed kite. Another interesting thing about it, it's actually an Australian endemic. It's quite an unusual species. And generally, Australian endemics tend not to do as well as the sort of more evolutionary modern species. But this one's doing fine, and it's quite common, become common on the Central Coast, which is great. The eagles, now, I haven't got you a lovely picture of a wedge-tailed eagle from the website, but this is pretty much how you normally see eagles around here, pretty high up. And that's why when people say they've seen a large eagle-y thing flying over the village, it's usually the square-tailed kite. The wedge-tailed eagles, although they do come down sometimes, are usually high, circling around. And there's certainly a pair in the Strickland Forest that wander our way. And as you can see why they're called wedge-tailed eagles. They have wedge tails. By comparison with the square-tailed kite, which fortunately has a square tail, He's not quite as big. And then another of the birds of prey that we all got very fond of was this black-shouldered kite, which spent 1.5 years with us on our floodplain almost every day and could regularly be seen eating rats, at which one of our senior members, in fact, Mike Belfield, said, "Oh, a great cheer every time I see him eating a rat." So there's natural rat control for you. And he got a name, black-shouldered kite's a bit of a mouthful. So I called it Biscuit, BSK being black-shouldered kite, and it because we didn't know if it was a male or a female. So Biscuit was here for 1.5 years. For about 6 months, he or she had a companion, and then they both, one of them appeared for a while, and we haven't seen them for a number of months, so they've probably migrated off somewhere else. Who knows? And then in terms of, everyone wants to know about rare birds. This remarkable, it looks like a small owl, but it's actually not that small. It's a reasonably chunky owl. It's got a short tail. Lives in Strickland Forest. It's called a sooty owl. And it's one of our rarest species. It has a distinctive call called the bomb whistle call. It's sort of pew. That's not a very good imitation. Anyway, go online to birds in backyards and look up sooty owl. You can hear the bomb whistle call. It whistles. So occasionally you hear that. Unfortunately, when it whistles, it does one whistle, then it doesn't whistle again for 10 minutes. So you think, oh, what was that? And it doesn't repeat it. But anyway, in Strickland Forest, we have sooty owls. And there is one looking at us, looking at a photographer in the night in Strickland Forest. So, okay, that's some I thought I'd show you. Then we might talk about living with wildlife, and then I've got a bunch of pictures of some of the challenges, that some of the wildlife that are quite sometimes difficult to live with because of what they do to your fruit or your houses and things.
Good one, Richard. Some of those are absolutely gorgeous. That little sooty owl is so sweet looking.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing. So let's have a discussion, and then we'll come back to some photos a bit later.
Fantastic, thank you. So Richard, you've talked a little bit about some of the birds, and there seems to be a great diversity here. Can we talk a little bit about some of those other creatures that you've seen in terms of the mammals and the reptiles?
Yep. So, and I'll come to some of them because anyway, we do have swamp wallabies that appear periodically. They're nearly always solitary, so you just see one. We seem to get old ones, and maybe they come out of the forest and they're, for some reason we seem to get old ones. In the last 6 months, there are many fewer wallabies, and what's happened is that with COVID, a lot more people are at home, and they're walking their dogs in Strickland Forest, and that does drive wallabies away. So it's nothing much to do with us. I think it's in the forest, wallabies feel much less welcome. So whether they'll bounce back and learn to cope with dogs, or whether there's some other reason, I don't know. But we haven't seen many swamp wallabies in the last few months. But one of the reasons of the bird walk and this talk is to get people recording them and letting me know, or putting on our Slack channel that they've seen them, where we can see if they are still here or not. So we have wallabies, we have foxes, which is not ideal. Again, they seem to have become a bit more shy recently. Maybe the council has a poison program, not around us, but nearby. We have more and more chickens on site, which are very tempting to foxes. But currently there's been no chicken accidents that I'm aware of. So we do have foxes. We can come on to some of the issues to do with snakes and things a bit later. We had rabbits when we arrived. We actually decided the most sustainable way to manage them was to get a professional shooter to shoot them. And it's much kinder than being poisoned, which is what most people do.
So did we do that, Richard?
What's that?
Did we actually do that?
We actually did that, yes.
Oh.
At a professional shooter. And if he gets a good shot, it's an instant death.
Yeah.
But anyway, the rabbits hadn't come back for whatever reason. So anyway, yeah, we do have those things. We have reptiles, we have frogs. We have possums. Not many possums. If you live in the suburbs, we used to live in Brisbane, the suburbs, and we had brush-tailed possums all the time and ring-tailed possums. Here, you hardly ever see them, and I attribute it to the fact that we had or have powerful owls which do prey on them. So they have actually got a natural predator here. So they're there, they're in the bush, brush-tailed possums, mountain possums, called bowbucks, ring-tailed possums, but you don't see many of them.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Yesterday, Richard, you would have liked it. We were down on our common house lot, and we heard this tremendous squawking by a couple of cockatoos, no, a couple of kookaburras. And I've heard a few people say that if ever you hear the birds making a really strange ruckus when you're in the forest, that there's usually a creature that they're being disturbed by. And sure enough, we looked over and they kept dive bombing a goanna that was up the tree.
Okay.
And I wasn't sure how the goanna was bothering them, to be honest.
It would go up trees and eat their nests, get into their nests if it could. So that they would recognize it as a dangerous predator. Well, that's interesting because I haven't seen a goanna for a while.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. Listen to the birds. They'll tell you what's going on. The only trick is noisy miners. They have an alarm call for hawks, and they have an alarm call for a big fight among noisy miners. And it's not always clear which is which. So you just have to, when you hear it, you have to look at the sky and see if there's a hawk around.
Oh.
Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. Or sometimes they can see it and you can't.
Mm-hmm. And Richard, you talked a little bit about the birds, returning to Narara because it's springtime to have their babies or whatever. Are there other changes, do you notice changes with the wildlife here at other seasons of the year too?
Yes. One of the biggest is the pecan festival for cockatoos. So the pecans, they get edible, the nuts get edible usually about March. And typically we have about 18 to 20 sulfur-crested cockatoos around here, like now, as sort of resident. But when the word gets around about the pecans being ready, I try and count them. When I count them, I count the minimum, not the biggest count I've ever got to is 122 birds, cockatoos. So yeah, the pecan season is pretty dramatic. Of course, what tends to happen with local people, they get a bit fed up with birds. But if we had an American visitor, famous founder of co-housing called Charles Durrett, visited, he thought it was absolutely fantastic. The place was overwhelmed with huge parrots. So could be a tourist attraction. Cockatoos and the Pecan Festival in Narara Ecovillage.
Actually, Richard, it's interesting that you mentioned the pecans because I've only ever seen the cockatoos going for them. Are there other creatures that also come for the feast?
I'm sure there are. Cockatoos, and by the way, it's mainly sulfur-crested cockatoos, but also corellas, both corellas. It's a good question. I can't say I've seen other birds eating pecans, but I'm sure they would, especially, and if it walks to the ground, fall to the ground, I'm sure something will eat them.
Mm-hmm. Richard, just a question here whilst we're talking about cockatoos. Has anyone here had problems with the cockatoos eating the timber on the outside of their houses or decks yet? Have you heard of that?
Yeah, they do that. That's right.
Oh.
They're very intelligent. They're easily bored. They need to keep their beaks sharpened, or need to stop their beaks growing too long. So they actually need to, like fingernails, they need to sharpen them. So they'll be on the lookout for wood. So the only answer is, well, first of all, if you see a cockatoo in your garden, shoo it away. They are intelligent enough to know that they're not welcome in certain gardens. So by all means, go out, wave a broom at them or something. It may work, it may not, but if you do it often enough, they actually know that they're not welcome. And then the other thing is try and cover up the timber with metal or something if you can. But I say we actually trained our little dog to, if a sulfur-crested cockatoo came in the garden, to chase them out, well, to bark at them. There was one particular bird that would look at him and say, "You're joking," but the others would actually fly away. So yeah, it's a problem. They're intelligent, bored, and quite powerful.
Uh-huh. And Richard, totally anecdotally, we've had only a couple of days where I've looked outside in the morning and there's been about 15 cockatoos sitting on my roof. Do you know what would bring them in such a group to sit on my roof?
Well, I said there's a group of about 18, and in the morning they move around seeking. Well, they're not particularly hungry then. They will move around. They're not in a hurry, so they may spend some time on your roof, but they won't be there for long. They'll go down to the triple span greenhouse and see if they can find anything there. They'll go up to Farm Square. They'll go up to Sharon's house at the top of the village, see if she's got any nice new plants. So they move around. They'll check out the pecans. It's not the right time of year. Sometimes they just sit there. They look bored, you know. They probably are. But no, I don't think there's any special reason why they're there. They just move around. They're probably eyeing up something, maybe your garden, trying to decide if it's worth having a go at.
They certainly
if they do, rush out there with a broom.
Yeah, they certainly enjoyed Candy's sunflowers, didn't they? Did you see that? They had just got to their beautiful dried perfection, and you know, within a day, gone.
Sunflowers are absolute paradise for cockatoos. Yeah, they love them. So you're asking for trouble. If you want to grow sunflowers, grow them indoors, and like Candy's earthship,
yes,
or grow them covered up. And as you probably know, never ever use blackbird netting. Blackbird netting catches birds and bats and everything, and it's really hard to get them out. If you're going to net something, use white soft netting with fine mesh. If you can get your finger through the net, the holes are too big. So it's almost like a white sheet you need. But you do need to cover them up if you really want to keep your sunflowers. I probably wouldn't grow sunflowers unless but grow them for the cockatoos by all means, if you don't mind.
Wow, I didn't know that about the mesh. That's fantastic. I've got a comment here saying that cockatoos, from Linda and Meng, saying cockatoos can live up to 70 years. Is that true? 70?
Yes. Yeah, that's why don't get one as a pet. Well, don't let your child have one, because it's unlucky if you say to explain to a child he's got to keep it for 70 years. I don't think he would understand what 70 years is like.
No. We had. Sorry, Richard, we had that conversation. One of my boys wanted a tortoise.
Yes.
They also last a long time, apparently.
Yes.
So anyway, we ended up with a pet mouse.
Right.
Do you have a favourite bird? You probably get asked that quite a bit.
I have to say, the thing that probably at the moment I find most exciting is from about the end of October, you will sometimes look up to the sky, and you may need binoculars to see them, but you can see 40 or 50 or 100 swifts. And these are birds that breed in Siberia, and they come zooming down, and they follow the storm fronts. So they move fast. If there's a storm in northern Darwin that's coming down to Sydney, they'll follow it down. So they'll cross Australia in a week or so. They follow the storm fronts. Anyway, from October onwards, you get these swifts. They're a kind of swift called the white-throated needletail, because they've got white throats and little needle tails. And they fly very high. And you'll suddenly look up. It's usually fairly silent, and see the skies full of these things. If you take a photograph, you'll think, oh, I must have got some midges on my camera lens. And I've done that. I took a photograph of a wedge-tailed eagle, and I thought, why are these midges on my lens? And then I looked more closely, and it wasn't midges, it was needle-tailed swifts. So I actually, that thought that these birds have come from Siberia, they follow the storms. They could be back in Singapore in a few weeks' time if there's a storm. They zoom around. They land very rarely. So I think that's probably, I find that really exciting to think that we're connected to the rest of the world by these birds. And then they'll go back again at the end of summer.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to know that the connections in the natural world can continue, even though for us humans, our connections are limited at the moment.
Yeah, well, birds are a really good way of forming a connection because they're the most obvious animal species. They're all over the place. They're usually obvious, unlike mammals that spend their life trying to be brown and grey and not be seen. Birds are often visible. They're all over the place. And they're a very good way to get into understanding ecosystems. If once you get interested in birds and then you start to work out what their lives are based on, it gets you into ecology. So it's one really good way of connecting with nature. I mean, there's plenty of other ways. There's plenty of research saying that just being in the forest or seeing green or seeing plants is good for your health. Smelling soil is said to be very good for you. So connecting with nature is a really good thing, and it's really sad that we've lost it. And when you see someone like the President of the United States flying around in his air-conditioned airplanes, his air-conditioned cars, and saying that he loves the environment, but he doesn't mind poisoning it, you realize people don't get that it's actually part of us. What's out in the environment comes into us through our skin and our breath and our eyes, and you can't separate it. So yeah, we're all connected.
Richard, just going back, I can't get over that 70 years thing about the cockatoos. Are they the longest living bird?
I don't know. Albatrosses, there's some albatrosses. Yeah, I don't know I don't know what is the longest living bird. No.
And in terms of lifespans, is there an average lifespan?
Yeah, with the little birds, it'd be quite short. 3 to 10 years. The bigger they get, the longer they're likely to last. So cockatoos are quite large. But the little ones would have, let's say, maybe 5 to 10 years.
Some of you who've been to our eco-village might have actually seen towards the front, or towards the middle, I guess, of our site, we have a bowerbird nest. And Richard, I've seen a plain blackbird floating about in there, or flying about in there, but you showed us a picture of a bowerbird just before that was black and gold. Is that, which bird makes that bower?
Okay, two things. First of all, it's not a nest, it's the bower. It's the mating ground. So there is a nest somewhere else, probably well hidden. So it's the nightclub where the guy gets dancing and collects blue items which excite females. Seem to be related to the fact that they have blue eyes. So blue things excite satin bowerbirds. So the bower is a mating ground, not a nest. There will be a nest somewhere nearby. Yeah, this bowerbird, which is, I presume it's the same one. It's been here ever since we've been here, so I call it Brian, but who knows? Anyway, he's a male satin bowerbird. So they're different from the regent bowerbird. Satin bowerbirds are bigger. The male, it looks black, but actually if you see it clearly, it's a shiny blue purple in the right light. It's really glossy. And to our eyes, we don't see as many spectra as birds do. So we see it as black. It's fairly wary, which is probably why it survived having its bower next to the children's playground, next to Robson's building roads for the stage 1, next to trucks going past, today next to people digging up ditches. So it's a wary bird, but yet often when you go close to it, you'll see the bird flying away. Or occasionally if he's really carried away and clucking and making clockwork noises, he might not realize you're close. But that's a satin bowerbird. So, and the females and the young males are green and brown, so very different. They don't get that shiny black until they're mature males.
Okay. A question here about the regent bowerbird. Do they collect things as well?
Yes, and I think it's yellow things for regents. I haven't seen a regent bower here, but presumably there must be some somewhere. I'd have to check in the bird book, but it's usually the color of the eyes of the bird is what they collect.
Oh, that's very interesting. And now, speaking of birds that like to live and build their habitat in populated, noisy areas, I understand that we had a family of plovers behind the old greenhouse near the Earthship. Did you see them?
Yep. Look, since you've got onto some of the sort of more challenging birds, I might flick to some of the pictures I've got, and that's one of them.
Oh, great.
So we'll try this. Screen. So, Can you all see that?
Yes, thank you.
And I guess you know what that is. So we've already talked about sulfur-crested cockatoos. Very intelligent, quite charming, very chatty. Interestingly, it seems they don't have hierarchies. There's no dominance hierarchy. So to some extent, you could say they practice sociocracy. That they're all equal and they have to get everything worked out. And the Narara Ecovillage is a no-guru place. And that may explain why they're talking all the time, that they're communicating, trying to sort things out. Anyway, sulfur-crested cockatoos, we have talked about them. They will chew up anything, but they have to admit they're very charming birds. Well, I think they're charming birds, maybe. These are the other white cockatoos we have, corellas. They're less destructive, but they certainly join in the pecans. And the difference is they don't have crests. There's actually two kinds of corella here. There's the long-beaked one with a red face and the little corella on the left there. Okay, so now rainbow lorikeets, again, very charming, quite obvious. They are classified as pests in Western Australia where they've spread. They're very aggressive and they do take over nesting hollows, even though they're a native. So, yeah, to some extent, they can be a bit of a problem. There's the wallabies we talked about. That's an old wallaby at the dam. Now, so at the moment, I haven't seen many around. Some eco-villages really encourage kangaroos and wallabies, and they have them in the garden. But when you talk to them, they actually say, well, there is a problem. There are two problems. One is they eat the roses, and they eat the garden. And the other is, of course, a male wallaby or kangaroo can be quite dangerous sometimes a year. So, anyway, wallabies are lovely and cuddly, but you probably don't want them too close. And it's good for all wildlife to be wary of humans. Helps them survive.
I think I recognise this one, Richard.
I think you probably will. Excuse me. Just a moment. Right, so magpies, as you know, can bomb people. And there's a pair down in Pandilla Road that do that. And it just, some magpies get to hate humans or hate bicycles or hate dogs. But fortunately ours don't. Although one of our village members says she has a group of magpies that whenever she feeds her chickens, they come and they barge their way in. So you've actually got to be firm with them, otherwise they will run you.
Actually, it's interesting, Richard, that you mentioned those, the bombing magpies down the street, because we have experienced them near the community centre there, but we haven't experienced any, you know, rough behaviour from them here, even though my kids love running around and riding their bikes. Because that one down near the community centre is fierce.
It seems that some of them have a bad experience with humans, and they suddenly, the male will come to hate a particular kind of human. They have done studies because occasionally councils are asked to remove them because the birds are quite dangerous. They remove them, and amazingly, within an hour or two, another male has replaced them. Now that, well, you can interpret that in many ways, but so anyway, if you remove the problem bird, another magpie will come in, and hopefully it's not one that hates humans.
Hey, Richard, can I go back to your rainbow lorikeets for a second? I have a question about their partners. Is it true that rainbow lorikeets have life partners?
I don't know that. Parrots often do form permanent bonds, so I think it's quite possible. I wouldn't want to be quoted on that.
And if in an instance where a bird has formed a bond with one bird, what happens if that one gets hit by a car or dies?
Yeah, they will grieve. They definitely do grieve. And depending on the bird, some of the little fairy wrens will very promptly have another mate. Actually, they're quite promiscuous. But yeah, they'll usually find another mate. Maybe not instantly, except in the case of magpies, it seems to be instant. It's amazing.
Okay.
Um, this is a pied butcherbird, a grey butcherbird, and the problem with them is if people feed them, they can become rather tame and aggressive and assertive, and they're potentially quite dangerous birds because of that beak. You don't want them anywhere near children. And occasionally people at our cafe have fed the the grey butcherbirds, and you shouldn't, because it just encourages them. They should be out in the trees, not in with us. And here's what you were talking about, the masked lapwing. It used to be called the spur-winged plover because it has little spurs on its wings. And it is, some of them have got a nest in the middle of the field near the front of the village, and they will bomb you if you go close.
Oh, wow.
They very rarely hit you. They're mainly for show. They squawk a lot. They come in like a dive bomber and then swerve away at the last minute. But they very rarely actually hit you. I'm not aware of, well, I've been told they never hit you, but other people say they do. Anyway,
And how are they size-wise compared to a magpie?
about the same size. Yeah. That's just showing off its wings.
Yeah, it's spectacular.
Noisy miners, no, they're a native, but they're also very aggressive, and unfortunately very aggressive to other natives that you might like, especially little birds. Not much you can do about that, except don't plant grevilleas with big flowers. Plant grevilleas with small flowers, and plant nice, dense, prickly shrubs that small birds can hide from. So the noisy miners like grass, open grass with trees, exactly what the RFS like, because it minimizes fire. So unfortunately, as we do all this fire control, we're creating perfect habitat for noisy miners, which is a shame. Snakes, we haven't talked about snakes, but because they are a challenge. This is Kate's with us. I call it Kate's snake. There's a story here that this was the heritage chicken house, and this large python used to appear there regularly. One night Kate was out, and she's here, she could probably tell the story, but anyway, she opened the gate, put her hand up to the latch, and unfortunately there was a python there which bit her. Pythons are not poisonous, so it's the same as being bitten by a dog or a cat. Anyway, that was enough so that the diamond python was removed. Now, they are part of the ecosystem, so in an ideal world you would live with snakes. It's practically a bit difficult, and these are a bit unnerving. And the answer is, if you have chickens and if pythons appear, they've just got to be really securely fenced at night so the pythons can't get in. That way you can live with pythons. They're not poisonous, they kill by constricting. And snake handlers say that they're, on the whole, friendly, docile animals that only want to keep out of your way. I don't know, Kate, do you want to add anything to that story? Maybe she's gone.
There we go.
No, that your story is quite correct.
Okay.
I recovered.
Okay.
No ill effects.
So it was quite a spectacular snake. And we also, when we moved in, there were some pretty whopping goannas. Well, technically lace monitors. I'm interested to know, I mean, you occasionally see one. I don't think I've ever seen one as big as the ones that were here when we first arrived.
And do you put that down? What do you put that down to, Richard?
Yeah, snakes will generally avoid humans and human activity. They generally they want a safe life. It's not many snakes that will want to live near humans unless there's a food source. And the one thing, if you don't want snakes, do not keep hamsters or guinea pigs or pet rats. Pardon me. Because that's their favorite food, rodents. So they're very good rodent hunters, and we want in that sense we want as many as we can.
There is one, or there was one down at the Triple Span. I know when we were on the trip co-op duty, John used to go down at night, and he'd often come back and say, "Oh, I had to jump over the electric fence again. The snake was lying across the path."
Yes. Right.
And we've got a few not so friendly snakes too, don't we, Richard?
We do. We have red-bellied blacks, which come out of they seem to like the wetland. Now, there's not great any consolation. They're actually not that dangerous. They mainly eat frogs, and the way their teeth are arranged is that it's quite hard for them to bite you. Because they're black on top and red underneath, they look pretty terrifying. So they're the other common snake, and yeah, they give you a bit of a shock when you see them. There have twice been records of a death adder, but I don't think that was in the days when the site was pretty overgrown, the early days. So I don't think they're around anymore. Snakes generally try and keep out of your way. You've just got to be careful. Don't jump over a log if you don't know what's the other side. Don't lift up bits of corrugated iron because they love the heat of corrugated iron. And if you go into a corrugated iron shed, have a good look round because it's the perfect place.
Actually, Richard, it's funny what you say about the logs, because I had a group of homeschooling students here on site this afternoon, and I said, now we're going to have a look around this area and see what signs you can see that animals live here. We're going to look for animal homes or animal droppings. And immediately someone said, can I go and climb that big pile of logs? And I said, well, we're not looking for those animal homes.
Yes. Good advice. I mean, if you're an adult, climb them, but very carefully, and just make sure look where you're putting your hands and your feet first. And especially as spring comes, any day now, they'll be out. Once it gets warmer, the snakes will be out, and they are a bit irritable when they've come out of winter. So they're hungry and irritable, so be careful.
Richard, you mentioned the red-bellied black snakes. Do we also have brown snakes around the place?
Probably. The thing about brown snakes is that they're often, someone says it's brown snake, it's often a tree snake, which can be brown. They can also be yellow and green, and they can also be black. So a brown snake, there probably are some, they are dangerous, but I am skeptical of an accurate record. Usually when people say, I've seen a brown snake, if you've got a photograph, it turns out to be a tree snake. But yeah, you've got to be careful.
Okay.
So I was talking about animals that are a bit of a challenge. Oh, now I want to end up, I don't know how we're doing for time, but what I call the Goldilocks species. These are ones that are just perfect, that you really enjoy. There's really no major problem with them. We want to encourage them. So just hang on a moment. So my favorite, and I think most people's favorite, has got to be the superb fairy wren. This is the male. They eat insects, so that's all good. They don't upset anybody. There's lots of them. They're charming. They're tiny, and that's exactly what we want to encourage. And plant as many prickly bushes as you can, because that's where they are safe, and they'll eat your insects for you. So I think they're my #1 Goldilocks species. The little finches, red-browed finches, again, you often see them down on the floodplain near our greenhouses. They like long grass and seeds. They're seed eaters. So what you need to do is make sure the people mowing the paddocks always leave a bit of grass. Mowers tend to find it hard to leave grass because they want to have it finish the job. But red-browed finches are good news, little bit, and we have small flocks of them here. Swallows, no, they build the mud nests, and that's not always terribly popular with the house they choose. These ones were in the farm square, where our machinery is kept. And so on the whole, they weren't bothering anybody very much. But they're great insect catchers, great mosquito catchers. So we want them. And you may be aware, have you heard about Insectageddon? There's evidence that insects are suffering a catastrophic decline around the world. In Germany, they sort of dropped 60% over some years. You only know that if someone's actually studied them for 30 years. And there's not many studies in Australia that are that long. But insects are on the decline. Therefore, the insect-eating birds will be affected. So swallows used to be common. We still got some around, but we should really appreciate them because if they're there, there's still some insects. But if the insects go, they won't be there. And they're beautiful birds. And they build these lovely mud nests. And you can see that they've got some feathers. It looks like guinea fowl to me or something, those feathers. Anyway, they collect feathers and build these mud nests. And there you can see the mouth of a young one there. So swallows are all good. And particularly we should appreciate them because in Europe they're in trouble. That's partly because European ones migrate and they have to go through Africa and the Middle East where all kinds of terrible things can happen to them. These swallows don't migrate, but we do need to appreciate them. This is, again, I can't see any problems with our big white-necked heron. This is a big heron, stands about chest high when he's upright. And one of them has become quite tame, wanders around our garden and neighbouring lots in the floodplain, presumably catching frogs and insects. A magnificent bird. The herons are a good thing and they don't cause any problems that I'm aware of. And they really enjoy the detention basins. We've got 2 detention basins, which many members really annoyed when we had to build these big detention basins, but they've turned into excellent little, and they're full of frogs, which is why the herons like them. And now we've seen ducks there, several kinds of ducks. So our detention basins have turned into lovely little biodiversity resources. And the last birds I was going to show you, these are what I call the Huang tawnies. It was actually John and Vanessa who showed me that they often have a pair of tawny frogmouths roosting in a tree near them. Well, last year, and I presume it was them they bred, they did manage to bring up a young one. Here's one of the adults and the young one. So tawny frogmouths, again, all good news. They're very innocuous. Sometimes you'll see them, sometimes they'll spend the day on a fence or something. Not a good idea because they can get attacked by other birds. Normally they sit still and try to look like trees. And they eat insects as well. And as you know, they are not owls. They look like owls, but tawny frogmouths have huge mouths with which they catch and eat their prey and small feet, whereas true owls have big feet and they kill with their feet and their talons, and then the beaks just chop it up. So owls hunt with their talons and feet, frogmouths hunt with their mouths. Otherwise, they look quite similar.
Richard, I think I found these guys. I saw them today down in the oak trees near the visitor centre. It was a total fluke. I just looked up and I thought, that's not a dead branch.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, whether that's the Huang tawnies or another pair, there may be another pair of tawnies actually. I think there's quite a few of them around, and once we know where they are, they'll often be there, but they're not usually there. They'll spend a few days there and then go off somewhere else. That's probably a good idea, so that predators don't find them.
And do you ever see them as singles, or are they always in a pair?
Yeah, you do. Yep. But yours seem to be particularly faithful. They're often in pairs. So that was my pictures of some of the ones that are problems and some of the ones that are really not a problem, and plant lots of bushes.
Yeah, they're lovely. Thank you. Richard, one bird that you haven't mentioned that most people experience when they come here to the Ecovillage is a bellbird. Are you able to talk a bit about the bellbirds here? Yes.
The ringing sound of bellbirds. Initially, people say, "Oh, isn't that lovely?" And in a way, it is the chiming of bellbirds. However, that chiming they're actually trying to drown out other birds in a way, and they're very aggressive to other birds. And the result of this is they drive away small birds, and they drive away the birds that eat lerps, and lerps eat leaves and kill trees. So the bell miners drive away the small birds, and therefore the lerps multiply. The bell miners actually lick them for honey, and then the lerps kill the trees. So if bell miners are with you for too long, you end up with lots of dead trees. And we've had that in a number of areas. Now, what you hope is that they'll move on. And in nature, they should move on to somewhere else. Ours haven't. or well, actually, this year I think they might have. They might have moved a bit. So I don't know. There are some places that are so perfect for bell miners, you'll always have bell miners, and we may be one of those places. But fortunately, we do have other birds as well. So, but they're not particularly desirable, but they're part of the ecosystem. Hopefully, they'll move on, and they'd have their place to play in the ecosystem. Dead trees are good for insects and other birds, so, and the forest will normally manage it. It's just if they're in one place for too long, you get a lot of dead trees.
That's an interesting correlation. I didn't know that. I won't look on them so favourably when I hear them now.
Well, enjoy the sound. I mean, they're going to be there, so there's no point in hating them because you'll just gnash your teeth and grind away your molars. It's a lovely sound, and it's part of nature, and we'll watch them and see what happens. They may move on. They may get a disease. Who knows? Who knows?
Richard, I've got a quick question from our some of our Facebook viewers asking about how you know that a wallaby is old versus young.
They look tatty. Their ears have holes in them from fights. They've got chewed ears, and they're a bit slow moving. One of them was blind in one eye. You could see it had an injured eye. Yeah, they look like an old dog that's been in a fight or something. Which they probably have.
And do they ever bring their young ones to come and feed around here?
Yeah, they would. Although I've never seen one. Well, the only case is actually a fellow called David McLaurin was camping up at Farm Square in the very early year, the first time we moved in. And he opened his tent flap one morning and saw a whole lot of little black feet, a mob of wallabies. That's the only time I know that I've definitely seen small wallabies. I mean, clearly they'd be in pouches. Yep.
We'll have to keep our eyes peeled when we're out and about early, perhaps. Richard, we're nearly out of...
I was going to ask Bryden, who's a local, does he see the kind of birds and animals I've been talking about?
I do, yeah, and I've there's a couple that I don't see. I don't see the plovers unless I go over your way. But we've got a lovely bunch of fairy wrens, and there's a big lantana bush which we keep intentionally because we know it's a habitat to them, which we'd otherwise cut it down being a weed. But yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, well, I mean, with lantana, yeah, if you clear it, don't clear it all at once because they need the habitat. And try and replace it with a native equivalent. Yeah, interesting.
Very good. Well, Richard, I think we're almost out of time. Thank you very much for coming this evening to have a chat with us. I really do appreciate it, and I've learned a lot myself. And I'm very much looking forward to joining you on your bird walk in a couple of weeks' time. Do you just want to quickly explain to our newcomers what's going on for your bird walk?
Yep, okay. On the morning of Saturday, the 19th of September, I'm going to lead a bird walk from 7:30 in the morning to 10:30. And we'll just walk around and see what we hear, see what we see, talk about how you identify birds, try and get to know the common calls, see what happens. And in particular, that's almost exactly when some of the migrants may arrive. If we're lucky, the dollar birds will arrive that night, and we'll be busy arguing about who goes where.
Fantastic.
We've got to make sure it gets on the website so you can see how to book. So I'll talk to somebody.
I'm getting the thumbs up here from John, who's our IT guy.
Okay, John's there. We'll make sure it's on the website. If you want to join, it's $25 a head for the for members of the network. $35 a head otherwise, and you get some refreshments in the middle of it, and the profits go to the village if there are any. It'll be small. It's limited to 12 because we found that if you get more than 12, it's often not a very good experience. I think it's about, without any advertising, it's about half full now. So if you're interested, hop on the website, or that would be the best thing.
Fantastic. Thank you, Richard. And I should point out too that that's going to be a big weekend for us here at Narara Ecovillage. On the following day, on the 20th, we have Sustainable House Day, which we have some tours. Often we open up homes, but that's a bit crazy this time. So we'll be opening up our village instead, and people can pre-book a spot on those tours via our website. And the evening before is our next Friday night Zoom, and we'll be chatting with Margot from, Margot is part of the food production group here, and she's organised for the Triple Span to, you know, come to abundance with growing things. And she's going to talk us through what the big experiment was that they did down at the Triple Span, and the results of that, which will be useful for anyone looking to grow vegetables in this climate in particular, I think. So there's lots happening. To find out more about these events, come and have a look at our website, nararaecovillage.com. Otherwise, Richard, I'll say good night to you, and good night to all of our viewers and listeners. And thank you very much for coming.
Could we play the sound of a sooty owl before we finish up?
That's a very good question, the sooty owl.
Ready?
The best I'll see if I can.
I've got the sound.
Who is that?
Sooty owl. Sooty.
There should be another. Is another call coming up?
Yep.
Yep.
So there you go.
Very
That sounds-
good. Thank you, Meng.
That
Thank you.
sounds a lot like my baby daughter. I'll keep an ear out for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
so
everyone.
much.
Have a good
Thank you,
evening.
Richard.
Thank you.
Okay, see you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.